Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Stablecoins Are Killing It. We're going to do a deep dive into central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. I'm your host, Lou Kerner, and I've been crypto 24/7 for a little more than 3 years now, with a focus on stablecoins over the last 6 months, as I believe it's going to be the first trillion-dollar market in crypto. In addition to this show, we started Just Stable about a month ago, which is a Web3 message boards for all things stablecoins. And I'm a co-founder of Peg Network, which is a stablecoin platform enabling anybody to make a stablecoin out of any ERC20 token. And that's a partnership with Bancorn. We'll be launching that next month. So, I'm doing this in stablecoins now 24/7. And I've long considered central bank digital currency, CBDCs, to be a subset of stablecoins. And we featured David Zhao with China's CBDC and Stablecoins Are Killing It episode 6 in June. And really the genesis for today's call was a really awesome comprehensive report, CBDC report that our featured guest published a few weeks back, which I saw as a great opportunity to do a deep dive into CBDCs on Stablecoins Are Killing It. So I'd like to welcome our guests from the block, Ryan Todd. Hey, Ryan.
Thanks, Lou.
And Mike Rogers. Mike?
Hello, thanks for having us.
Cool, welcome, Mike. And they're gonna walk through a presentation for about 30 minutes, and you can download the presentation on SlideShare. There is a link in the chat room if you want to view the slides there and download the slides. And we'll spend the last 30 minutes in Q&A with the audience. So if you have a question, please ask it in chat. And if we choose your question, we will open up your mic and video, make you a panelist, and you'll be able to ask the question yourself in a really interactive environment. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Ryan, I guess. So Ryan, you'll be walking through the slides. So Ryan, you're now the host and can grab the screen.
Got it. 1 second. All right, I think we're good.
All right, well done. I
All
had
right.
confidence.
So, thanks, Lou. As Lou mentioned, Mike and I just wanted to talk through this comprehensive global look at largely the state of central bank digital currencies, but more specifically, it's a report that really looks at the most advanced proposals across the globe. And you can view this report. We're going to talk really high level through some of the main findings, and we're going to talk through some definitions and introductions, but really the meat of this report, it was really written for enthusiasts and stakeholders that are specifically looking at CBDCs alike. There's a lot of different types of content within the report. It's over 180 pages, but you can find this on our website, theblockcrypto.com, on our report tab. And it's really meant to kind of pick and choose the topics that you find interesting. So if there's something that we gloss over on this call, and you want to take a deeper look at it, I'm sure you can find more information on it in this 180-page report. But just real quick, for those of you that don't know the block, we're a media and research and data information service provider for the digital asset industry at large. We also cover broader financial services and markets in some of our news and research coverage. And within our research business, we have over 6 full-time analysts covering the industry with a lot of diverse backgrounds. Some come from equity research, venture, investment banking, consulting. So we really bring a professional, we're really trying to professionalize not only the space, but the art of research and covering this fast-paced industry. Quick intro about myself. My name's Ryan Todd. I'm a research analyst at the block. I've been at the block now for almost 2 years. And prior to that, I did equity research covering payments and consumer finance companies. I've been doing research in the digital asset industry now since that role, and even since grad school. I'm also joined today by Mike Rogers. He's a new full-time research analyst at the Block. He concentrates on the long-form digital asset reports that we've been putting out, the CBDC report being the cornerstone there. Prior to that, he founded Millennials in Blockchain, which is a collaborative distributed learning group. And he also has done consulting work in the space. And he also has worked for Deloitte and BlackRock. I always get those confused, Mike. So that's about the Block. We're going to try and get through this as quick as possible so we can answer as many questions. But we're going to do a quick high-level intro on the report. And time permitting, we'll try and dive into some of the core sections of some of the more advanced proposals. Again, you can find the report on our site. And it is also hyperlinked. So if you look on the slide share, I guess that should pull through. All right, so central bank digital currencies, also known as CBDC. It's really interesting, like when you bring up the topic of central bank digital currencies, there really isn't a catch-all definition. It really depends on who you ask, how they define what a CBDC really is. And I think for simplicity purposes, one of the more just cleanest definitions that we've come across actually comes from the Central Bank of England. And they describe a central bank digital currency, and this is the Venn diagram off to the right. But they look at it as an electric form of central bank money. So it is electric. And it can be used by households and businesses alike. So it's not central bank reserves, which is what financial institutions and like other financial organizations have access to or have had access to in some countries for decades now. This is something that if you're talking about a retail CBDC or a general purpose CBDC, is something that's widely accessible to both households and businesses, no matter the size of the business, not just financial organizations and large banks. And it's also, central bank issued money. So it's electric central bank issued money that's universally accessible by all. That's kind of the simplest, cleanest definition. The interesting thing though, when talking about CBDCs, is there's just an incredible amount of expanding gray zones, just given the explosion of not only e-money, but as we kind of alluded to, the rise of stablecoins and new payments innovations within that sphere. It really is hard to place this into one clean box. Several organizations have different matrices and diagrams on how to differentiate between some of these things, such as e-money and Bitcoin and stablecoins such as USDC coin, and then an actual hypothetical CBDC. But one matrix that we actually like a lot was the latest IMF matrix, which kind of differentiates these different electronic money based on this diagram on the left. And the key difference here between, say, like a Venmo and a hypothetical CBDC would be the ability to not only offer potential programmable features. This is what you could maybe get also with a USDC coin or other stable coins. But the key here is that it's really backed by deposits at the central bank, it's legal tender, and it's central bank issued money. So those last three really provide this backstop and assurance that this is a central bank issued money with backed by liabilities and deposits at the Fed. And the key differentiation there is also that this isn't commercial bank money. It really is issued and backed by central banks. So the reason why we actually, the main impetus behind even releasing this report really came down to the fact that 2020 has seen just an absolute explosion in not only interest, but research and just public announcement by central banks, which we can also get into in talking about the merits and real intentions behind some of these public announcements. But 2020 has been nothing short of just a real explosion in activity within the space. The year started off with an updated survey from the BIS, which commonly gets cited, but nearly 80% of central banks that were polled by the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, are engaging in full CBDC research efforts with various levels of experimentation. That number is up from 60% in 2017. Really the work is pretty diverse. So we kind of saw, this really is, in some sense, it looks like it's a new phenomenon. Mike and I, and this was really brought up by Mike, but we talked about this, that it really kind of, the idea that nothing really is new under the sun, like this has been in the works for decades. Central banks have, by way of their mandate, are required to find ways to innovate payment infrastructure due to the fact that they operate public payment infrastructure. And just the fact that ensuring resilient, stable, and secure payments is widely known to boost economic activity within economies. So central banks have always had an interest in continuing to be on the frontier of payment innovations, and so it naturally makes sense that they would look to CBDCs and stablecoins and whatever else digital asset industry has to offer, and have been keeping tabs on the industry now for a few years. But I think more publicly, we've seen central banks signal that they're actually interested in this, in part due to just the rise of things like Libra. And if you're more of an advanced economy, there's also been some political and geopolitical pressures to respond to things such as China's digital currency electronic payment system, or DCEP. So while we've seen the activity in 2020 really pick up, it's good to remember that this really has been, a multi-decade process. Banks have been looking at e-money. Even the Bank of Finland is cited as looking at as someone that's actually looked at one of the first prototypes of a quote-unquote CBDC back in the early 90s. They were exploring electronic purses and digital wallets and reloadable cards as a form of money. And this journey kind of extends from that all the way through Bitcoin and into things like Libra and DCEP more recently. It's also good to remember that while 80% are interested and engaged in full CBDC research, a separate poll that came out by Central Banking, which is a publication that covers central banks at large, they found that the likelihood of a central bank actually issuing CBDC in the next 5 years to be under, only like 5% of respondents said they actually think that's possible. And while half say that it is a relevant thing to keep in mind, the other half say it's really not a top 5 priority at this time. So I think it's still very early stages. I think one last point to add here, if you're looking at just predicting or in the business of trying to predict when these things could actually be implemented, one stat I like to throw out is how long it took central banks in bulk around the globe to finally release real-time payments networks and real-time gross settlement networks. And it's taken both of those at least over 15 years to really see more than 80 to 100 central banks around the globe to release that live implementation of that technology from the inception of when the first one actually implemented it. So we still have a long ways to go on these things. Granted, potential external pressures and competitive reasons may actually push central banks to look to implement faster than other technologies in the past that they've implemented. And one last stat also that I think is interesting is, again, the research around this, the literature of CBDC has really just exploded itself over the past 5 years. If you do a search on Google Scholar, in 2015, there was one paper that you can find that mentions the term CBDC. And in 2017, there was maybe like a couple hundred, or less, actually, it was more like 100. And now 2020 is on pace to have 5x that volume of just unique academic papers that mention or are largely about CBDC topics. So the literature itself is also exploding. Some of the potential motivations behind exploring a CBDC are pretty varied. There's no one size fits all answer. It really depends not only on the size of your economy, which depends, or which drives what's at risk and what's at stake. Sorry, what's at stake for these economies. The US, for example, like, to borrow words from some of the stakeholders we talked to, set the table for the global financial market and global economies. They need to be as conservative as possible around implementing this and making sure everything's well thought out and tested, and the technology that they end up deciding to use makes sense for the use case. So the motivations for all these things really depends on the country itself. Some of the 5 core motivations for a central bank to explore are detailed on the right. You know, the common one that you really hear, at least for emerging markets, is either a way to improve financial inclusion, or even a way to bootstrap, and this kind of goes hand in hand with that, but if an economy has lacking infrastructure, it maybe offers the way to bootstrap into richer financial services and new forms of public infrastructure that a central bank in an emerging economy might not be able to deliver or be able to invest in and properly operate long term. So key here is just it really depends on the motivations. And then in our report, again, the 80% stat gets thrown out a lot. They're pretty much every country, and those are just the public numbers that we have. It's assumed that most countries are at least have written a report or have internal teams discussing CBDC in general. But our report covered the most advanced CBDC research and pilots that touched on some of the earliest pilots that we saw with retail CBDC, things like Central Bank of Uruguay's e-peso, the Riksbank's e-krona, and the National Bank of Ukraine. They've all done and completed pilots on their own forms of CBDC. Riksbank's also still active and in their own phase 3 pilot. But today we really want to dive into something that we found the most information on, and Mike's going to go into this. But the Bahamas and the Central Bank, or the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, both are very active in their pilot work, very public with their work, and they also have different service providers and tech providers that we've spoken to that have helped kind of highlight what it's taken to get those initiatives off the ground. And so there's some unique findings there that we can talk through today.
Brian, there's it's a very diverse group of countries on this list. Are there any characteristics that you think that they share? Or as you said earlier, that there are lots of different reasons that countries can be interested in introducing a CBDC? Right.
Yeah. It really depends. So let's take the largest economy, and that gets a lot of the news headlines right now, is China. But their intentions for looking at CBDC is very different than even Uruguay and Ukraine, and in some sense, Riksbank actually kind of has moderately similar interests and motivations. But for China, for instance, which we can get into next, but not only do they have the desire to internationalize their own currency, the renminbi, they also, and this is all very, when you talk to people in China, the experts have different views on this, but the general consensus is digital payments in China is largely saturated by two players, Alipay and WeChat Pay, their intentions are that they want to take back that power. They want to make sure that's something that they can control. They can own the payments market. So there's definitely this idea of wanting to be competitive within payments, but there also could be a desire to protect your monetary sovereignty with this idea of reduced frictions for if there's this world where money is really borderless and it's simple to swap currencies and have access to all of these different currencies that are digital. You're going to likely in that world see higher competition and a higher likelihood of currency substitution, which brings a whole list of risks and concerns for central banks at large. But I think stepping back from China, and I think this is a point actually that I like to make a lot from Sheila Warren at the blockchain World Economic Forum, their head of blockchain. She likes to say that really each country needs to evaluate, and they have this great policy toolkit that describes this all out, and I highly recommend looking at that. And it kind of explains this further, but they basically recommend that every country has a different list of priorities that they need to address with a CBDC. And that list is going to be very different depending on the country. But it's a conversation, and that's the hardest part, is really figuring out what are your priorities in order that you're trying to solve with something like this. And really the tech discussion should take the backseat to that. The tech actually largely isn't the problem. In some cases, and actually this was on the couple slides back, but many central banks actually aren't even really considering blockchain. They have the technology today to try and implement something like this. It's really organizing this complex issue across different stakeholders within your own geography and economy to figure out what the problem is trying to be solved.
You talk
very
about,
varied.
I'm sorry.
So it's really varied based on economy.
Sure, and you talk about protecting the monetary sovereignty of countries, and I certainly get that. But do you think it also presents opportunities to extend, the users of their their monetary system outside of their own countries, and potentially brings risk to the U.S.'s stance as the global reserve currency?
Right, and well, so getting on that, I mean, that's one of the bigger concerns that's actually helped to accelerate interest within the U.S. specifically. When you see initiatives such as the Digital Dollar Project, which has been co-founded by an ex-CFTC chairman, Christopher Giancarlo, that he's been really able to get on Capitol Hill with 3 separate congressional hearings and has really been able to kind of drive home that message that if this world does exist, if countries do move to digital currencies as just another form of money, as an option, just providing that optionality, that could potentially threaten dollar global reserve status, just by way of just having wider access to these things across the globe. So it's definitely, it's something that our report didn't actually explore just because the research there was pretty rich. I personally don't have that strong of a view because I'm not a macroeconomist, but Mike actually might have something. I don't know if you have something to add.
Yeah, particularly on global reserve currency status. This is something that I like macro policy and just economics in general, where this is something that I look up. I've been more interested in, say, how the repo markets work, as well as some more of the debt markets in relation to foreign exchange. And from what I've researched, it's not really something that gets taken away from you necessarily. It's more so something that you kind of lose, meaning it's not necessarily about the technology itself for, say, reserve currency status. I mean, if you really think about it, Think about the majority of the world's debt is denominated in U.S. dollars, as well as the petrodollar, where transactions are cleared in U.S. dollars as well. So that's not really something where, say, if you had a blockchain or whatever form of digital money or e-money that you have, that the technology would necessarily take that away. Again, it's more so something that you kind of lose over time if you were to look at, like, say, some of the other empires, like, say, the end of the Roman Empire. I mean, I think Brian kind of mentioned it before. History is usually the best guide for stuff like this. So I don't think that really the reserve currency status is the thing that is too much to worry about when it comes to central bank digital currencies.
Okay. Do you have a sense? Because the sense that I have is that there are a lot of countries that would like to decrease their dependence on the U.S. as a reserve currency, for various reasons, and would like to have alternatives. And certainly, this technology, I think, makes other alternatives, even more attractive.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to, is it when, the time frame, if you're looking at it, because realistically, if you go through our report, one of the most advanced pilots that you'll see was actually the Ukraine one. They provided the most publicly available technology related information for what exactly was going on with retail central bank digital currency. But when you actually look at the specifics, the amount of currency that was really utilized in the pilot, the volume and, just the transaction level, it was, minuscule. Ryan, you have a better idea. You did the actual conversion. It's great to see from an experimentation standpoint, but nothing at the point that it could possibly replace anything that currently goes on in our financial and monetary system. That's something that I think that we really had a strong appreciation for when doing the research for this report, is how complex the monetary system, specifically the two-tier financial system, really is. That's something that we really dug into, and you can see that it's not as simple as disintermediating financial institutions. There's not really much of an advantage to do that. You're going to need intermediaries to do certain processes, like, say, KYC and AML, and setting up these digital wallets. And what if somebody has a technology issue with their digital wallet? They're not going to go straight to the central bank. So there's a lot of, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a lot more complex than a lot of people make it out to be. And that's something that a lot of us, when we first initially got into digital assets and first heard about Bitcoin, which, by the way, I am a big Bitcoin fan. It's not as simple as, long Bitcoin, short the bankers, as some would make it out to be. There's a lot more that goes on the back end, and a lot more that really needs to be done in order to create something that is viable for mass adoption.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I think one quick point, kind of what you're getting at, Lou, and I think what I was trying to say as well is just, maybe it's not, but I think it's a narrative that actually is catching policymakers' attention. And I think it's something that actually, and the Giancarlo example is what I like to always give, but he's had 3 congressional hearings. One narrative he likes to push is leaning on COVID, and as an example of a lack in ability to distribute fiscal stimulus through the CARES Act, and how even 3 months after that bill was passed, there's over 30 million Americans that still hadn't received their checks. So that's one narrative that's being pushed and kind of leaned on, at least within the U.S. But another one definitely is this dollar threat idea. And I think if you just look at even the hearings from Libra in 2019 and these 3 congressional hearings this year that he's appeared on, I think Congress is really, at least in part, listening to that. And it's kind of being used as a way to push forward activity, at least in the States. At least that's my view. But I agree with Mike that it's still so early. And I think something else that also gets lost in the conversation is the Fed has finally been public. They announced last month that they're now doing a multi-year partnership with MIT to research CBDCs and maybe even develop an internal prototype to test out different types of technology behind it. But I think they have over 100 people working on FedNow, which is their real-time payments network that they're going to roll out soon. And they are building their payments team. They've definitely been thinking about, they're the most like equipped and deepest bench, if you will, of PhD economists and technologists really in the world out of all the central banks. And so if it does look like there is this pressure to or threat on the dollar from digital currencies, I would expect that they're going to be prepared to handle that accordingly.
Cool.
How are we doing on time? Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit faster. So the big takeaway with China DCEP, which is also known as digital currency electronic payments, the biggest takeaway for me is, although we've seen a lot of headlines, it's again another great narrative to promote the development that's going on in CBDC. There still has really been nothing official, at least document-wise, that's been released from the PBOC. We've had several high-level officials, even at the central bank, comment on DCEP, especially in response to the Libra announcement last year, which is when they said shortly thereafter that they had been working on DCEP for 5 years and are close to launching it. That's kind of what kicked off the furor around DCEP. They're still like in pilot phase. And based on our conversations, and you mentioned, Lou, that you had David on, so I can kind of skip over this, but it's still, they're now trialing in last month, 2 months ago, it was about 4 cities. I think last week we saw another major national China bank release their own test app for DCEP and hosting the wallets. But it's still not like quote unquote going to come out tomorrow. They're still in a very advanced pilot phase, and there is a lot more questions than answers at this point. But it's definitely just the elephant in the room, so to speak, for a lot of countries, and talking about CBDCs at large. And then before I pass it to Mike, who's going to talk through Bahamas and Caribbean, I think, and for the purpose of the digital asset industry at large, I think watching what happens in these advanced economies that are exploring CBDC will be the most impactful on the digital asset industry should they actually launch one. We've seen, I guess, in the UK, the Bank of England, they actually were one of the first banks to initiate public research on CBDCs. They've been talking about it in speeches now for almost 5 years. Actually, I guess now over 5 years. And even more recently, last week, Governor Bailey gave Stablecoins, and it really is, if there is one common theme that we've seen, it's that most central banks, when they publicly talk about stablecoins, they say that they should and could and will coexist with CBDCs should a central bank issue a CBDC. So those two roles are really looking to be intertwined. I don't think that's very controversial at this point to state. The ECB has done a lot of work on wholesale CBDC, which we haven't really talked about yet, but is an entirely separate beast from retail CBDC. We're kind of going to leave that off to the side for now. But a lot of their work has looked at enterprise use cases for DLT within settlement, interbank settlement, and cross-border payments. How can we make those cheaper, faster, more resilient? There's been a lot of work there, and we cover that in the report. If you find that interesting, I'd recommend taking a look at that. Bank of Canada is also a really interesting case study, in my opinion. They've been looking And if you do the Google Scholar search, they like you can find at least 20 to 25 different separate CBDC papers alone this year from different employees of the Bank of Canada, different researchers, and it's really remarkable how many different facets they've researched already. And they have done a large wholesale CBDC pilot known as Project Jasper that also engaged with Singapore's Project Ubin. The notable thing there was they demonstrated that a wholesale CBDC can be used for cross-border payments effectively. And Ubin is also something that's now moved forward and is now looking to commercialize stablecoins actually for this use case. Whether it's actually issued and backed by a central bank, making it a CBDC, remains to be seen, but they have moved forward with this idea that stablecoins can improve cross-border payments. So that was a pretty notable development. Bank of Japan's gotten a lot more active this year. They've been hiring. It might slip into an official government response to be more active in researching CBDC. And I think the big one in the US, we already talked about this on the last question with the recent partnership with MIT. But the takeaway here is, in the hypothetical world that an advanced economy releases a CBDC, it's our view that this would be a pretty significant tailwind for digital asset infrastructure, specifically if the CBDC uses public key cryptography or digital wallets. You're going to expect to see wallet and exchange providers have a role to play for that hypothetical CBDC. Even custodians and even stablecoin issuers, all these things definitely are heading in the same direction. So that's the ultimate, like, why does this matter for digital assets? Why does CBDC matter? It's funny how if you take the Bitcoin view, and Mike kind of mentioned this with the long Bitcoin, short the bankers, kind of the CBDC gets wrapped into this banker view or enterprise blockchain view. But really the two worlds, it really would provide a tailwind for the industry at large should an advanced economy release one. And so for that, I think it's worth following and keeping tabs. Even on the most recent enterprise announcements, we've seen Visa make hires specifically to explore CBDC use cases. And even earlier today, MasterCard came out with a similar announcement. So it's really active, and I think it's clearly a trend to continue watching on that front.
One of the
pass it to Mike.
One of the, just go back to the U.S. For a moment. One of the more interesting comments that I've seen when I've heard folks from the Fed talk is, I think it was Bench, I forget his first name.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, I've seen him speak a few times, and one of the things he said was that he didn't think that the U.S. CBDC would be programmable. He said that they need to optimize for safety, obviously, and that programmability, obviously at the margin hurts safety. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I found, I think the programmability is what is the most exciting thing about it. So to come out with a CBDC that isn't programmable is kind of head scratching to me.
Right, and I'm trying to find it. We had this stat. So only 1/3 of respondents, and I think maybe you can get programmability without DLT and smart contracts at large. I don't have a view on that, but one thing, and for this report, we spoke to over 20 different stakeholders that are working with CBDC or are thinking about it from a policy perspective, or from how does this impact the financial services industry. We spoke to a lot of different people that have different perspectives on this, but one common theme that came out from those conversations was this idea that we might not actually need a blockchain, and maybe programmability actually, like, that is something we could strive towards, and that actually should be maybe the end game. But if we're going to take, and this is like, we're talking about, money, central bank issued money and global economies and the power that brings and the responsibility that how important that is to maintain order and structure. It might just be too risky at this time to jump straight into programmability. That said, again, this kind of gets also into this idea that there are all these different motivations. You could expect to see maybe some countries more, not aggressive, but more willing to take on that initial risk or experimentation just because they have less to lose, so to speak. And one last point too, also with the digital asset industry, is even things that we're seeing right now in DeFi or decentralized finance, it's effectively programmable finance. It's protocol finance. It's smart contracts. And the activity alone that we've seen this past couple of months, that actually offers its own fertile experimentation lab for central banks across the globe. So I think they're keeping tabs on what's happening there. And I think depending on how that space evolves, maybe we'll see some of that be leveraged in these long term. But I do think a common theme we saw is actually like maybe blockchain might not even be needed for this. The technology of blockchain itself is constantly changing. We don't really have a set standard yet that we can trust that can handle the throughput and it needs to support a global economy such as the US. But it's definitely something that banks are keeping tabs on. I don't know if Mike has a different view.
I mean, I think that the end game here is Web3, which is something that has been theorized for a while. I wrote for I've contributed to a book actually that's coming out at the end of this month with a former grad school professor of mine. And in one of the chapters that I wrote, I did discuss Web3 and kind of what the whole end game and goal would be. And I think that you hit it on the head, Lou, with programmability. It sounds like you're an Anthony Lewis fan as well, who used to work for R3. And I think that he has a really good grasp on this stuff. Because realistically, I mean, if you're reinventing the fabric of the internet, as Amber Baldet likes to say, basically, I mean, the whole idea behind what Web3 and programmable money would be, that's what you're really doing it for, in my mind. That's what you should be striving for at the end of the day. But in order to get there, I mean, there's a lot of theorized stuff, and kind of as Ryan alluded to, and something, one of our main points from the executive summary was that basically, paraphrasing here, but the powers that be allow digital assets and specifically the things in cryptocurrency to exist as basically sandboxes and places to experiment for things that they'll likely utilize later on with the things that will have mass adoption. And that's kind of the view that, at least that I have. I mean, because realistically, I mean, if you look through a lot of the speeches and things of that nature, you could call something decentralized, but just calling it decentralized doesn't make something decentralized. I wrote about this for one of my pieces for the block for our Genesis subscribers, basically saying that, Ether Delta calls itself a decentralized exchange up until the point that they get indicted by the SEC, and then all of a sudden, okay, we can shut it down because we're not truly decentralized. We are our data feeds are So you see exactly what I'm saying. Same thing with DeFi and all these other things that are popular now because of maybe venture capitalists and other things of that nature for returns on investments and speculation. But it's a lot of experimentation, which is great. Experimentation in the name of innovation is needed, but when it comes to something where you're talking about how we transact and have our social contracts of doing things that go back thousands and thousands of years, you can't have a bug on line 666 of, say, the Ethereum. Exactly. You can't really have a bug there and then have that be the loophole to next thing you have Ethereum and Ethereum Classic.
But I hate when that happens. Okay, well let's let's get through these last slides and open it up to questions.
Sure. So basically, I mean, going back to that, the Bahamas and Caribbean, specifically for the powers that be, let's just call it, it's a great testing ground on the sense that they're emerging market economies that have high cell phone penetration rates, and a lot of it is fragmented systems. So specifically the Bahamas, I mean, you have 700 islands, and it just made sense, really, because when you look at central banks, I mean, specifically their monetary policies, they synchronize them, and they kind of work in unison. So I think that it's a great place to gather data and to really test what is actually a live pilot today. They ran into a little bit of trouble because of the pandemic, and they got devastated by a hurricane last year as well. But that's expected for a national rollout actually in Q4 this year, and they are already testing it on the islands of Exuma and the Abacos Islands. So it's a live central bank digital currency as of right now. And the next one was one of the highlights of our report as well, where we had the co-founder of BIT, Simon. He created a specific case study for the report that we put together, and they're getting ready to launch in Q3 of this year, and they're pretty big on advertising and kind of surveys and gathering data, and they're almost there. We're looking at probably like 5 islands that they're going to test it out on, because the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is basically made up of a bunch of different jurisdictions that got together to form a currency union, essentially, and they're ready. So these are the ones that are the closest, as well as what's going on in China as well. And I think that this is where we're going to see, similar to how we all tested the ICO protocols and things of that nature, and when we were transferring back and forth between wallets in 2017, we were actually guinea pigs in a much larger experiment. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at right now, and I think that more of the developed economies will get an understanding of exactly how these systems work once these pilots are completely live throughout both jurisdictions. And yeah, that was just a further representation. I mean, I would really highly recommend, going to the specific sections within our white paper, and specifically BIT's co-founder provided a nice understanding of their technology stack. It wasn't just marketing material. It was more so actually some technical stuff in there, which is, stuff that is kind of rare these days. A lot of this stuff is specifically marketing material that's out there on the internet. So it's kind of hard to find wisdom in a lot of places, but yeah, we're happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Okay, terrific. So let's see, for some reason, okay, there we go. So our first question we'll get from, William McGuire. William, should now be a host, or you should now be a panelist. There you go. I think you're muted.
Yes. Hi, guys.
There you go. Hey, William.
Hey, William.
Hi, everybody. Great. Thanks. So, great presentation. I just must say I haven't read the report, so maybe my question is answered in there. As you said a few times, there's been a lot of pilots, and a lot of banks are trying things. So it's like, when all is said and done, more is being said than done, in my opinion. There's lots of hand waving and not enough practical projects. So in your opinion, what will be, if I can call it, the CryptoKitties moment that you would be expecting for CBDCs to really start getting into practice?
Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, well, nice reference there with CryptoKitties. CryptoKitties is kind of a way that showed, some interesting novelty with Ethereum, but also kind of showed one of the issues with the actual network itself. So, I'm not sure we're looking necessarily for a CryptoKitties type moment, but I think that, again, it's a little different from, say, the ICO protocols. And I mean, fun fact was a lot of the ICO protocols didn't really have use cases, and they actually went to central banks behind the scenes to lobby them to, kind of provide networks, because a lot of them, again, didn't really have much use cases, and we haven't seen a lot of development out of a lot of the ICO protocols. It's been years. So realistically, I think that we're looking at more something like you would see with, like, say, a technology type rollout for an actual, like, legitimate system. Like, say, if you were to roll out, I don't know, like a new version of Windows, or beta test something along an application type thing. I think that's what we're really kind of looking at. And I think that if you're looking for the things that are actually occurring currently, I mean, obviously DSAP, they're testing in several cities right now. And the biggest one, I mean, I was just on LinkedIn earlier today, the XCD Caribbean network for the Eastern Caribbean, they're getting close as well. So I think that that's kind of what you're going to see is the Eastern Caribbean as well as the Bahamas are going to be two of the ones that are actually going to be acting, and that's going to be this year. So I think that that's what I would really be looking for. And specifically, this is something that has already kind of happened. And the person that came up with the concept of FedCoin, JP Koning, he also worked with R3, and he created a white paper for them. He actually even retweeted our white paper a couple of weeks back. And specifically on the Bahamas central bank balance sheet, they already have the sand dollars listed there. So it's already a line item on a national central bank's balance sheet, which means that it's already basically a part of their financial system. So that's something pretty cool that I would check out in that section of the report. And that it's already here essentially in that sense. So that you could maybe even call that the CryptoKitties type moment.
I think one quick thing to add, and we didn't talk about this, but this idea of synthetic CBDC, and I'm a little biased here, but and this is my personal view, but I'd research and follow what's going on in stablecoins a lot, and I think CryptoKitties moment there. I mean, these things are already on stablecoins. If you look at USDC, is already on a public blockchain network, Ethereum, and has plans. I think we're about to announce later today to go onto other blockchain networks, but it only takes one central bank to say, you know what, we're going to regulate any stablecoin issuers that issue USDC, and this actually will be official money. You just have to park the fiat that's backing USDC at the central bank. Kind of similar to narrow banking in a sense. But if we saw something like that, that actually would officially, I mean, you have a live CBDC, depending on how you have the definition. But that's something I'm constantly thinking in the back of my mind that could be a quick way into like a CryptoKitties moment.
Thank you.
Okay, you good, William? Good. Okay, thanks, William, for the question. Our next question is from Lori. Lori, you've got to unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you for taking my question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Anytime, Lori. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is, can CBDCs be wrapped like Bitcoin has been, so they can be ERC-20 protocols?
I'm sorry, I think you cut out there. What was?
I think if I heard her, she said that she's asking if CBDCs will be able to be wrapped, like I guess Bitcoin has been wrapped, so that it can be used in ERC-20 type DeFi protocols.
Yes, thank you, Lou.
Okay, gotcha.
I think this is something, and I'm just speculating here, but when you look at the MIT Fed announcement, and when you talk to people that work for MIT's digital currency initiative, they're going to be looking at all these types of things, and maybe there's ways to embed privacy, and maybe there's other technologies and use cases from digital assets that we're seeing, like wrapper technology. But there's no reason why it couldn't be, is my view on that. The thing that gets back to is what would be the use case and purpose and priority that would drive that decision. I don't know what that would be.
Yeah. I mean, kind of adding on to what Ryan said. I mean, I think that from what I've seen now, most just I spent a lot of time in the security token side of digital assets, and I mean, Securitize is one actually my consulting clients, and they're basically, I think a lot of people are heading toward being protocol and technology kind of agnostic, in the sense that it doesn't really pay to limit yourself, in the sense that you want to be interoperable, considering that we're kind of creating a parallel financial system here. I specifically can't even, I haven't seen anything particular about having it, them being wrapped, but I could see that they would potentially have it as an option, but I think that mostly right now, for where everything is, I mean, even kind of backtracking from what we were looking at before with like having outside of your financial jurisdiction and becoming global reserve central bank digital currency and stuff, I think that most are just really focused on kind of testing their own systems within their own jurisdictions. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So I don't think that anybody's really talking about having the ability to for it to be wrapped right now. But I mean, I could assume that probably privately, because there is obviously stuff that they talk about with the public, and then there's stuff that goes on behind the scenes. I would assume that that's definitely come up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lori. And we've just got a couple minutes left here, so I'll take the last question. And that's, if we're here in a year and we're talking and getting an update on CBDCs, what do you think we're going to be talking about in a year that we're not talking about today?
Probably, I'd say interoperability with stablecoins, and how maybe stablecoins helped synchronize and accelerate some of the central bank digital currency ecosystem. That's kind of something that we found within our writings and research, and from the discussions that we've seen, is that they're going to be kind of complements to one another. They're not really necessarily binary, in the sense that they will work together, central bank digital currencies and stablecoins. They're both kind of regulated versions of digital assets.
I would say, just real quick, we haven't mentioned it much, but will governments, or some governments, actually want private transactions, and to what extent will we provide that, or would the government or central bank provide that for their money, their CBDC? And what would that even look like? I think there's just a lot of policy questions and conversations that will start to evolve should this accelerate into next year. And even one last thing we also didn't talk about was even something like Libra. In their revised white paper that came out in April, they not only hinted, but they directly said they hope to one day be the network that supports global CBDCs. So should Libra launch next year, it will be interesting to see what that looks like, how the conversation with central banks and the partnerships that could come from that with Libra and different banks, what those are. I think Libra, everyone likes to kind of dismiss it, but they've made a lot of key hires, and they are inching towards that launch. That's something that I think people will be talking about more next year.
And do you even know what that launch is?
No clue. I just know if you look at it, they got slammed hard last year globally from every type of policymaker possible. And I think this year,
been a surprise, right? I mean,
no, absolutely not. And they've hedged themselves now, and now it's a payment network. It's not new digital money, and they're not trying to create money. But I think their hires are pretty serious when you look at it. It's ex chief legal officers from major global investment banks. They definitely made some key hires that suggest they can check those boxes. So.
Yeah, sure. I think if nothing else, Facebook has shown the world for the last 15 years not to doubt it. So Ryan, Mike, really, thanks a lot for being on the show today. I thought it was a great show. Thanks everybody who dialed in, and we'll see you tomorrow on Stablecoins is Killing It, episode number 14, featuring Ampleforth. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Lou. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Lou.